Hello, horror addicts. I'm Kristin Battestella, aka Kbatz, and as you can see, I am almost neck deep in Dark Shadows. I know what you're thinking. Kbatz, what took you so long to talk about Dark Shadows? Well, it is a big show. There are over 1,200 episodes. So a lot of folks have said to me, I've heard about the show. It's supposed to be gothic and spooky, but where do I start? So I'm going to do a little bit of an introductory chat here. I may ramble because I love the show and I love to talk about it. I've written about Dark Shadows at horroraddicts.net, of course, and I've written in much more extensive detail on my own blog, I Think Therefore I Review. So you could also read some of the things about which I'm talking about today. Dark Shadows, of course, it's 1,225 episodes. The entire series is streaming on Amazon. Dark Shadows also has its own streaming channel, and blocks rotate in and out of the Hulu lineup. And you can also catch it on some over-the-air stations like Decades, if you're interested in some more retro television. Dark Shadows is fortunate that all of its episodes are intact. There's one episode that was lost that had to be pieced together from some photographs and some audio and some episodes before and after, because at the time it was actually standard policy to tape over everything. That's why we're missing a lot of the early Doctor Who episodes. That's why the early seasons of the Avengers TV show are lost. So Dark Shadows is really fortunate. All these collection sets here that are available on DVD, that's how you see the seasons that break down on the streaming networks also. These are batches of 40 episode blocks. And collection 1 of the DVD sets begins at episode 210. That's with the introduction of Barnabas Collins and the vampire storyline. There are 26 of these collection DVD sets in total. You used to be able to go to the DVD video store and, pick up a copy and say, well, maybe I'm interested in that, maybe I'm not. These are about $20, $25 a piece. So you could really jump in with some of the streaming formats. And if you see something that you like, then you can go order a couple of these DVD sets, which, as you can see, were different formats. VHS as well. Let's remember that fondly. These were released in larger sets, and then they came out in smaller slim case set editions. There's 26 of these. And then, well, hello, Kbatz. Episode 210, that's not, the beginning. Correct. After these collection sets, they went back. MPI, who did all the video releases for Dark Shadows, they went back and released what they called Dark Shadows The Beginning, which is another 6 collection episode set. And that actually is about the first year or so of the series before things really went supernatural. Which, it's easy to say that, but there actually were some spooky elements in the early season. There's a Phoenix storyline, which I know sounds strange, a woman who's a Phoenix, which is relatively unique to Dark Shadows. There were also ghosts that were interfering and getting involved. But in the beginning of Dark Shadows, it is really much more of a straightforward kind of gothic mystery. There are murders, and there are, people tampering with people's brakes and kidnappings and things like that. But it is really part of the standard kind of soap opera format. One thing happens, and then everybody spends, another 10 episodes talking about it. So when the show was nearing cancellation, they decided, well, we'll go for broke with a vampire. The great thing about Dark Shadows is there are gothic elements for everybody. Ironically, me being the Kbatz who loves the vampires, my favorite on Dark Shadows is actually Quentin the werewolf. He doesn't come in until collection 11. They also have a time-traveling 1795 storyline. That's how we get to see Barnabas become a vampire. And then we also travel back to 1897, and that's where we get into some werewolves and probably some inappropriate now gypsy kind of storylines. But there's something for everybody. So my answer is really, if you're looking for something in Dark Shadows, it's like, well, what do you like? You can really kind of begin anywhere. Today we're spoiled in we could just start anywhere. We could start with episode 1, we could start with the vampires, we could jump in 1897. When I was a kid, really, you only had the first year or so of Dark Shadows from the Barnabas storyline till after 1795 was what was repeated on some of the PBS stations. And that's often actually the package that you'll see on the Decades Network over-the-air stations. Only like an early block of 200 episodes. Really, up until the series was rerun on the Sci-Fi Channel in the 90s, did you actually see the entire show? I love 1897. That's the big Victorian heights, and there's all kinds of ghosts and crazy motifs there. Um, what really I think hurt the show was the Leviathan storyline. It's not bad in itself, but they went from what was much more famous, Bram Stoker, 1897, to going with this roundabout. Well, it was 1795, but then there was the year change, but then we're in 1897, so it's 1797, kind of roundabout kind of time travel. And then they end up with these Naga altars and these shadows and these mystery boxes and these annoying kids and these snake motifs. And the Leviathan kind of Lovecraft kind of motifs didn't really come across very well. And it wasn't so much at that point in the series that the writing was suffering, it was just that, again, that was standard of the time. People didn't expect to be able to watch this 50 years from now. They tended to revisit a lot of things that you do begin to see with the 1840 storyline that comes after. There's 1840, and then there's another 1841 parallel time, which today, a lot of these things about multiverses and quantum realities is quite common in science fiction. But back then, it wasn't something that you saw very often. So Dark Shadows uses the same stock company, and they sort of move around with all these time travels and all these storylines. And we like the characters, we like the actors, so we're interested in seeing who they're going to play next, or who they may be themselves, but slightly different. Dark Shadows also uses a lot of common Gothic motifs and storylines. There's a Adam and Eve kind of Frankenstein storyline. There's some Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in the 1970 parallel time, which also uses a lot of Rebecca. There's some Jane Eyre motifs. So really, again, whatever you're looking for, Dark Shadows has it. There are some of these smaller little fan favorites or spooky reunion kind of editions. These are smaller sets that you could also start small with. Or if you're a reader, they do have literature. Some of these older stories might be tough to find, but a lot of these new books actually are written by Laura Parker. She plays Angelique, the witch, in the story. On Dark Shadows, and a lot of these kind of books and materials come from Pomegranate Press, which is done by Catherine Lee Scott, and she played several characters on the show, Maggie Evans and Josette Collins. If you want to start with something short and quicker, several of these movies were made at the time, House of Dark Shadows and Night of Dark Shadows. Both of these are now available on Blu-ray. Again, for a long time they were not available. House of Dark Shadows was the first one. This one, again, revisits the Barnabas storyline, and it's a 1970 movie, so it's in much more of a Hammer kind of style. Here, free from daytime television, they're allowed to do something that's much more gory and, a lot more vampire violence and everything. All the police are already prepared with their crosses. And another thing that also kind of hampered the show, all the teens, were rushing home from school and everything to watch Dark Shadows live when it was in the 60s. And then the parents saw that they were making, a wild, violent movie like this. And there was a lot of, controversy at the time. What are my kids watching? Night of Dark Shadows came out after the series ended. House of Dark Shadows actually shrewdly, it uses the cast while the show is going. So in the 1970 parallel time storyline, the secondary cast is more handling the lead, and Barnabas is just said to be locked away in his coffin. So he's there, but he's not there, so because he's away filming the other movie. So that's also a lot of fun too, having a chance to have such a rotating stock company where you can see all these players in different ways. Night of Dark Shadows is a different storyline. It's a ghost kind of romance kind of storyline. And unfortunately, the Blu-ray doesn't restore the film as everybody tended to have hoped. You could see that the film looks like something's missing, or was edited, or there are deleted scenes, and apparently whatever footage there was just apparently is lost. So this one is a little choppy, it's a little messy. It's still entertaining, but I still enjoy it. But I really think it would have been cool if they had been able to continue all these movies, blank of Dark Shadows. I think that would have been a lot of fun. Nowadays, they have also done some of these compilations. This one is called The Haunting of Collinwood, and this one is called The Vampire Curse. These are also streaming on Amazon. And again, they're very affordable DVDs. These are about 3 hour sort of movie length compilations because, again, like a soap opera, not just one storyline is happening at once, but the Vampire Curse puts a composite here of all the 1795 episodes following how Barnabas became a vampire. And The Haunting of Collingwood is the Quentin storyline that's based loosely off of The Turn of the Screw, which there were other werewolf things happening. So when you watch these, you can kind of tell, oh, this is an edit, this is a compilation, there are things missing. But the DVDs actually include full-length episodes. So you do get a little sample of one whole storyline, and, well, this is how the show really works, which is kind of cool. I like these. These are kind of nice. If you're interested in one of the storylines and maybe you're not sure, you can give it a look. Or if you're nostalgic and, you know, maybe you've watched with your parents or something like I did, where you just want to have a nice little revisit of Dark Shadows, these are kind of good for a quick fix. I don't think you can get some of the VHS anymore. One of the neat things about streaming is streaming has subtitles, which the DVDs don't. But the DVDs also include a lot of behind the scenes and interviews with cast and crew, which is a lot of fun as well. This is the 1991 Dark Shadows remake, reboot, I don't know. The less said about, you know, the Tim Burton thing, we're not going to go there. The less said about that, the better. That's a big no. It completely misses the spirit of the show. This is a 1991, Ben Cross is Barnabas Collins, and this is a more nighttime kind of format, again, retelling the vampire storyline. And there's a lot of famous people in it, actually. Barbara Steele is also in it as Dr. Hoffman. And it has a more moody, kind of late night, kind of romantic kind of feel. Literally, the problem with this one is nobody saw it. It was actually it kept getting preempted by the Gulf War and was eventually canceled. And then, again, I simply think it maybe came around at just simply the wrong time. Now, this was 91. I mean, even 91, 92, the early 90s, we still tend to think of, they were still very 80s. We hadn't gotten into the actual kind of 90s styles per se as yet. But even things like Dynasty and Dallas and Falcon Crest, David Selby, who's my favorite Quentin, he was on Falcon Crest too. All of those shows were also kind of dying out at the same time. So it was the wrong time to try and have a nice nighttime soap opera format, and, you know, the show just had a bad spot too and was canceled. But this one isn't bad. This one's also on Hulu. You could give this one a look. It's only like 13 episodes anyway, so this is a more mini-series kind of format. Now, I do have to say about Dark Shadows, as I said, it's a soap opera, and it's hokey. It's going to look bad. Even though it was the height of productions at the time. They were doing things on soap operas that were never done before. In the 1897 storyline, it's actually very fast-paced. It's not a lot of people talking about one thing back and forth with the over-the-shoulder camera shots off and on again. There's actually a lot of action. There's werewolves, there's gunshots, there's seances and gypsies and curses and ghosts and a lot of special effects. It was really advanced for its time. But today, not so much. It doesn't look so good. The DVDs actually give you a nice kind of warning on the beginning of the videos saying, you know, there are innate flaws on this tape. It's not something digitally remastered. And when you're watching it on a, 60-inch 4K television like I am, you can see some of the mistakes. And Dark Shadows has mistakes. There are cameras that move into the frames. There are microphones in the frames. Everybody flubs up their lines. They look at the teleprompters. The styrofoam tombstones fall over. Sometimes entire walls fall over. You can see the ceiling at the fake grass. Sometimes the prop guns don't go off at the right times. Sometimes those ghost overlay, primitive chroma key kind of effects just don't work. And they also several times had to resort to something called kinescope. Now, the early episodes of the show were, of course, black and white, and then they switched to color. But then there were some episodes where they didn't have the original master tape, so what we do have surviving is kinescope. Now, I feel the need to have to explain what kinescope is to today's millennial audiences. The simplest way, I guess, to explain it today is when you have something on your big giant TV, and then you decide you want to video it with your smartphone. That's kind of what kinescope is. It's where they had a camera on a black and white monitor of the show as it was being taped. So some of those actually are quite effective and very moody and very scary when they're having these seances, and it's kind of this second hand kind of black and white, and it's kind of fuzzy and doesn't work, but it also kind of adds to some of that creepy Gothic atmosphere. So the show, we would think of it as hokey or camp, but that's not how it's played. That's what the Tim Burton show got so wrong. It really just got the tone of the show all wrong by making it funny, because the show plays it straight. That's part of what makes it so good. You know, we have a tormented vampire, we have a tormented werewolf, we have, you know, lovelorn witches who keep, you know, cursing people to make them love her, you know. So the storytelling and all the cast and the acting and everything really uphold. And even though it was a same day tape, basically live, where they were going with it whether the sets were falling over or not, you know, they played it on form, and that adds to us feeling the empathy relating to the characters, and it also adds to a lot of some of the spooky scariness. Now, as the show went on, some of it did get a little repetitive. The 1840 storyline, it has some good things. It's got this whole warlock head of Judah Zachary. Yes, we can clearly see that it's actually just a man, you know, hidden under a table with a box on his head. But some of it is also, you know, very frightening, and there's some psychedelic dream sequences and everything. But at that point, there were sort of ghosts being repeated, and then they switch into some really actually kind of standard 1841 parallel time, where they just sort of revisit Wuthering Heights with a love triangle. But at the end, you could see when they were revisiting things, that was more just the nature of soap operas themselves, where, hey, the show's been on so long, people aren't going to remember what happened before. We can touch upon this again. But the show is so exhaustive that you could really pick and choose, you know, well, if I don't like that storyline so much, well, I can skip around that one. The dream curse thing, that's a little weird. That goes on a little too long, maybe. And some of those crazy clothes in the 1970 parallel time are kind of wild, you know. But, you know, at the same time, I grew up with a lot of this 1970s Victorian Gothic revival decor. As you can see, I kind of like it. So that's one of the things I love about Dark Shadows. It has a lot of this great kind of Gothic atmosphere that kind of really accents the storytelling, even if we can look at it and say, gosh, that's garish and those effects are bad. So some people will be able to look over some of those bad effects or embrace those kind of effects and enjoy the storytelling, and some folks won't. This giant, big, huge set, I do have to mention. Let me lift it up for you. I didn't realize how big it was when I purchased it. As you can see here, this set is quite huge. This is not for the person who maybe thinks they like Dark Shadows. It's not the kind of thing that you give somebody saying, hey, did you see that movie? Hey, you like spooky old things. You know, maybe you like this show. This actually, I believe, retails for over $300, I should say. I do want to open it for you, though, a little bit to show you how cool it is inside. This includes everything. All these individual fan favorite and special edition reunion feature DVDs are included on here. All the behind the scenes and cast and crew interviews from the collections are included here. And everything is in order from episode 1 all the way to 1225, which can be confusing if you're going from these collection sets. As I said, it's over $300 retail. And I waited to when I had some Amazon credits, when it was Prime Day, when I had discounts and everything, and I paid just over $200 for it. And I really waited till it was on sale, and I weighed the cost of, geez, I have half the collection sets on DVD already. If these are $20 or $25 a piece, how much more do I need? And what's the cost of those individually? And are the availability? Some of these sets do go in and out of print, depending on if they're the new streamlined sets or some of the older sets. You know, can I get these for the price, or is this a better purchase? So I'm also a collector, so I waited when it was on sale and I got it and I love it. But it's not for the layman. I think there's plenty of other opportunities that you could really check out Dark Shadows on streaming. You get some of these individual sets or compilations. And really, you could start anywhere you want. That's the best thing about Dark Shadows. On one hand, it seems so huge for just being a show that only ran for such a short time, but because it had that daily soap format, it really had a lot of episodes and a lot of time to explore a lot of different Gothic and horror motifs. So if you like vampires, jump in with the vampires. You like the Victorian horror, go with the Victorian horror. You like the witch trials, go to 1795. I really think you could jump in anywhere and enjoy Dark Shadows. So I'm losing my breath talking about it. I'm so excited. So as I said, you can read some of the things that I've written at horroraddicts.net. I also wrote on the 50th anniversary for Search Magazine. It's tough to believe we're still watching shows that are 50 years old. And I've also written some in great detail at my own blog, I Think They're For Our Review. And remember, you can join us in the conversation at horroraddicts.net or join our Facebook group. You can tell us what shows you're watching, what you dislike or want to see. And don't forget, we're having our Horror Addicts Online Writers Conference at the end of February. Instead of being instant social media based, that's going to be a forum style format where we're going to have some messages and videos and workshops and articles from not just the Horror Addicts staff, but some of our writer friends as well, giving us a chance to talk with everybody online instead of trying to set up something live, because everybody's spread out so far away. So it's nice to be able to speak to you like this here. So don't forget to tell us what you think. And I have a lot of watching to do. Okay, bye.